us to halfway through Genesis 31, which is, we've covered the first 21 verses, but like from verses 17 to 21, we covered quite quickly. So what's the general review? At the start of this chapter, Jacob hears Laban's sons blaming Jacob for stealing all that their father had and for stealing their inheritance. And so when Jacob hears that, he checks to see what Laban thinks of this, and he finds out Laban's countenance is not favorable to him. Laban's not happy to see Jacob anymore. So then he goes, talks with his wives and asks for their advice and counsel. God gives him a vision telling him to return to Israel and that God will be with him. So he tells both of his wives the situation. Look, your fathers tried to cheat me out of my hire, but God has taken away the livestock and given them to me. Your father's countenance doesn't favor me anymore, and God has told me to return to Israel. And their response, unfortunately, shows Laban's, testimony or lack of provision toward his daughters. They basically say, he has no provision, no care for us now. There's no inheritance, nothing to expect after he dies. He sold us like slaves, and he's devoured our property, the idea of he's a wasteful spender. That's their testimony of their father, how their father has treated him. And I realize that. I don't think either of the daughters would have thought anything negative about Jacob serving 7 years to marry Rachel. But I imagine both of them looking back on the tricking of Leah instead and then asking for another 7 years for Rachel. Both of them are like, yeah, that's like treating us like slaves. It's like, I want another 7 years of work that I'm going to cheat Jacob on this. And the daughters were caught in the middle. So unfortunately, that decision was 15 years ago, and it's still affecting their relationship. And we have that brings us to verse 17. The end of Rachel and Leah's response to Jacob is in verse 16. Whatsoever God hath said unto thee, do. They're both fully in agreement that Jacob should leave. And so, verse 17 is Jacob going to leave. Do I have a volunteer to read verses 17 through 21? Volunteer to read verses 17 through 21? Go ahead, Pastor.
Then Jacob rose up and set his sons and his wives upon camels, and he carried away all his cattle and all his goods which he had gotten, the cattle of his getting, which he had gotten in Padan-aram, for to go to Isaac his father in the land of Canaan. And Laban went to shear his sheep, and Rachel had stolen the images that were her father's. And Jacob stole away unawares to Laban the Syrian, in that he told him not that he fled. For he fled with all that he had, and he rose up and passed over the river and set his face toward the Mount Gilead.
So, Jacob here, because of the riches that God has given him, he has enough camels for his entire family. That makes the journey quite a bit easier. If he had left, if Laban had said goodbye when he asked to go back to his family 6 years ago, it would not be as comfortable of a journey with him. And in those last 6 years, God has given him great riches. But because of that, they have camels, which is exactly what you want for this type of journey. He brings all his cattle. So we're talking cattle, sheep, and goats from the previous chapter. And remember that Jacob is raising his flocks a 3 days journey from Laban's flocks. So because of that, when Jacob just leaves, Laban's shearing his flock. So he's 3 days away with Laban's flock doing the shearing. So he doesn't notice until news travels that Jacob has left. I realized that distance means that Rachel stealing the household idols wasn't just the easiest thing. Like she went miles. Either on a pretext or just randomly when their family was visiting. She used that opportunity to steal Laban's idols, which both shows We know Rachel believes in the Lord, but apparently she also believes in the false gods that she grew up with. There is a part, if these are ancestor idols, which a lot of these cultures had, that to take them is basically to take the blessing, quote unquote, of your family's spirits, and basically to effectively take the honor of being the main line of the family by that. So there is very much a possibility there, both with how Laban views these and with how she viewed them as important enough that she's going to steal them before her journey. It's interesting. It would be obvious to both Rachel and Leah that Laban would not take their leaving well, and taking these idols is obviously going to cause conflict. You could have known even before he came that that was going to be the case. But all of that to say, Rachel, I guess, was tempted by the deceit there, and whatever she's trying to gain by taking the idols, she chose that decision. And in the few days head start they have, they pass over the tributary of the Euphrates River. That's where they're going. If you look at a map, Mediterranean Sea is like this. The area of Syria where they are is way up here. They're going down to Israel here, passes over the Euphrates tributary, heading towards Israel, still in Syria. Any questions on these first few verses? Yes.
Had you heard before that in that culture that those images were the key to the inheritance?
So, yes, I have heard that. And I think it's true if they were ancestor images, because it's basically like taking the entire rights that the headline of the family has with them, because the ancestor spirits are supposedly watching over the main family. That was the idea of a lot of these cultures, and that is very possibly what happened here.
The reason I thought it fits well with what Rachel and Leah said earlier, where she's not giving us any portion or inheritance.
Yes.
Well, I'm gonna take it.
We deserve it anyway. Yeah. And
not that it's good, but just
it's justified in the human sense.
yeah,
So with that, Pastor made the good point. If these idols are considered as part of the inheritance rights, Rachel taking them could be her taking for herself the inheritance that her father clearly is not giving Rachel or Leah. And because of that, it's very sinful, but it's justified in the human sense, like we deserve this. He hasn't given it, so I can take it. So Jacob flees. Laban doesn't know about it yet, but he's going to learn about it in these next verses. Do I have a volunteer to read verses 22 through 25? Go ahead, Steve.
And it was told Laban on the third day that Jacob was fled. He took his brethren with him and pursued after him 7 days' journey. He overtook him in Mount Gilead. And God came to Laban the Syrian in a dream by night and said to him, "Take heed, thou speak not to Jacob either good or bad."
One more verse.
Laban overtook Jacob, and Jacob had pitched his tent in the mount. Laban with his brethren pitched in the Mount of Gilead.
So, Mount Gilead, these are not really short mountains such as are in Oklahoma, for instance. There's a 2,000-foot mountain that's the tallest mountain of the Wichita Mountains in Oklahoma. That's not what we're talking about. But on the same side as these aren't the Rockies or Mount Rainier either. Think about mile-tall mountains. We would call them more than hills. We would call them mountains, but they're not the gigantic mountains that we see often around here. And my guess is you can see Mount Gilead from somewhere around 50 to 100 miles away, because this is the Golan Heights. They're a high plain that you travel south across. And so that means there's nothing in the way. The first mountain going south in the Golan Heights is Mount Gilead. If you're really interested in the geography, they're east of the Jordan River here. Going down past the Golan Heights, Mount Gilead would actually be very close to where Lot decided to journey. We're talking about north of the ruin of Sodom and Gomorrah, it's basically right before the drop off the cliffs that lead to the Dead Sea, is where Mount Gilead is. And so they're headed that way. Laban finds out on the third day that Jacob has fled, because there's 3 days journey between Jacob's flocks and his flock. So the news travels in 3 days. And when he finds out that Jacob's run away, he treats this like he's going to use military force, because he doesn't just travel with a small entourage. He gets all his brethren. And remember, we're in the city of Haran, the city that Abraham's father Nahor started. So like pretty much everybody in the city is related to Laban. And so he's getting all his brethren. He's getting the biggest, quote unquote, army he can. And he's going south to overtake Jacob. It's not an easy journey. We're talking up a bunch of hills. You have to cross that tributary of the Euphrates River. And it takes him 7 days to catch up, which also tells you that Jacob's moving fast. If Jacob had 2.5, 3 days head start, it takes 7 days to catch that up with a military party that's not leading any cattle, that's not slowed down by any young children or anything. Laban is trying really, really hard to overtake Jacob, and so he does, but at the Mount Gilead itself. So here they both pitch their tents on the same mountain. The Bible says that Jacob's tents and his family's tents were already there, and then Laban pitches his tents right to the side. So Laban doesn't go and immediately attack. He actually sets up camp here. He, even though he brought military force, does not try to attack. There's an implication twice that you can draw that Laban was going to, but God sent the dream. Don't speak to Jacob, either good or bad. And Laban, when he references that, says, it's in my power to do you harm, but God told me not to speak to you either good or bad. There's thought that if God hadn't intervened, he may have attacked first and asked questions later. He definitely, from his rebuke of Jacob, is accusing Jacob of hostility here. So, it takes 7 days of travel. Laban catches up with Jacob, and they're both on the Mount Gilead. Think it overlooks all the surrounding country. It is what we would call a mountain, but it's not a really tall mountain. Any questions or comments here?
Yeah, we like our foothills in Oklahoma.
Foothills in Oklahoma don't exist. Even the Wichita Mountains are what we would call foothills here.
Yeah, but can you spell it? It's,
O-U-C-H-I-T-A. Yes, Wichita.
it doesn't sound like Wichita. I'll say anything.
Yes. So, with that, we have Laban catches up to Jacob, and the first thing he's going to do is accuse Jacob. So that's verses 26 through 30. Do I have a volunteer to read verses 26 through 30? Go ahead, Yuri.
Laban said to Jacob, what hast thou done, that thou hast stolen away unawares to me, and carried away my daughters as captives taken with the sword? Wherefore didst thou flee away secretly, steal away from me? And didst not know that I have sent thee away with the mirth, and with song, and with tabret, and with harp? And hast not suffered me to kiss my sons and my daughters? Thou hast now done cruelly and so doing. It is in the power of my hand to bring in the earth, but the God of your fathers spake unto me yesterday night, saying, take thou heed that thou speakest not to Jacob either good or bad. And now though thou wouldest needs be done, because thou so longest after thy mother's house, yet wherefore hast thou stolen my heart?
So, this apparently is very similar in terms of the culture of this day. You will notice all the rebukes in the Bible, like when Abimelech rebukes Abraham, or Abraham, Abimelech, and Pharaoh. About 90% of them start with these words, what hast thou done? It's like, what did you do? Like, what were you thinking? And so what's Laban saying that Jacob did? Stolen away unawares to me, that's true. Jacob fled and deliberately did not tell Laban. So he did, fled away, and carried away my daughters as captives taken with the sword. This is absolutely not true. They went with him very, very willingly. Unlike him bringing military force, Jacob did not use military force on his own family. I don't even know what that accusation comes from. When I think of when you see totally random accusations that have no merit, I think of people accusing you of what they would do in your situation. Sometimes that's true. If you have a person who's just randomly accusing you of something that there's no merit at all, sometimes it's what they would do in your situation. But with that, he's accusing Jacob of taking away his daughters by force, and that's absolutely not true. Then verse 27 is a much gentler tone, and this verse, Laban very much has the point. He's saying, why did you flee away secretly and steal away from me without telling me? Because I would have sent you away basically with a feast and a party, with songs and dancing and timbrels and harps. It's like we would have had a great going away party for you, and I would have gladly sent you away, which is probably true. Like Laban is not happy to see Jacob stay anymore. And then verse 28, the other important part, has not suffered me to kiss my sons and my daughters. Thou hast now done foolishly in so doing. He's talking about giving them a going away kiss. And by sons and daughters, remember that word means sons, grandsons, great-grandsons, great-great. It means descendants. So he's talking about, in this case, his grandsons, his granddaughters, and his actual daughters. Like, you didn't let me kiss them and bid them farewell, say goodbye to them. And then he says, thou hast done foolishly in so doing. In terms of with God's protection, that's absolutely true. Jacob should have let Laban know and trusted God had told him to leave and that the time was right. God would have taken care of those circumstances. In terms of without God's protection on the purely human standpoint, it was dangerous to let Laban know what was intended. So there is a reason why Jacob did this. If he had trusted in the Lord, he would not have had to do that. The Lord intervened anyway, and Laban tells Jacob about the dream. I had the power in my hand to do you harm. Like, basically, I brought all of my brothers and relatives and such with me. We had military force. We could have hurt you. But God told me, don't speak to Jacob, either good or bad. So we have then verse 30. Laban's trying to figure out why Jacob did this. And the reason he can come up with is he's like, okay, you must have left because you really missed your father's house. He knows Jacob's family lives down there. And it's like, oh, that must be the reason why you left, but why did you steal my gods, my household idols? And it's interesting, by him calling them gods directly rather than just idols, he actually believes the physical thing is actually either part of or representing the gods he's made for himself anyway. And that reminded me, the New Testament in two different passages says something very similar to a person cuts down a tree and he takes half of it for firewood and burns it and cooks and warms himself and does all the needful things, takes the other half and carves it and shapes it and makes this beautiful mold and beautiful graven image, and then says, deliver me, for thou art my God. And God's making the point of, people who make their own idols and call them God should realize that's something I made with my hands. That's just like the wood I burn in the fire. It doesn't do anything at all. But Laban is very much thinking that way. And if, in fact, these are ancestral type gods, and to steal them is basically to steal the family rights, it's a serious thing for Laban because there's a recognition problem. Everybody in this town knows they were stolen. Everybody in this town knows unless Laban gets them back, basically, his quote-unquote family protections have deserted him. So it's something that Laban considers very serious. And those are all of his accusations. The only one that's not true at all is that Jacob took away Laban's daughters by force. The rest of them, that he didn't let him bid his children and grandchildren farewell, that he left without telling. He didn't directly steal the whatever God's images those were, but obviously he doesn't know that Rachel did. And so Laban is correct when they go missing at the same time as Jacob runs away, that those two are connected. So, any thoughts, questions, or comments on this? So, then we see Jacob's response. That's 2 verses, verses 31 and 32. Go ahead, Obi. So, Jacob, remember, Laban gave the reason at the end of his rebuke, that the reason that I think you left is because you really missed your father's house. And Jacob honestly answers, he's like, no, that wasn't the reason. The reason was because I was afraid. In verse 31, he's answering Laban honestly. What's the reason that I left in the way I did? Because I was afraid, for I said, peradventure thou wouldest take by force thy daughters from me. And it seems with Laban bringing his military entourage with him, that was his plan before God rebuked him, was to take his daughters, maybe his grandchildren and such by force and go back up. But that's Jacob's motivation. It's why he left and fled. And then we see verse 32, Jacob's basically saying, I did not take their gods. With whomsoever you find that thou findest thy gods, let him not live. So he's saying, you can kill the person who stole your gods if you would like, because that wasn't me. And then he gives Laban a blank check, a free opportunity to go and search. He says, before your brethren discern, figure out thou what is thine with me and take it to thee. Like, you are welcome to search, and if you find anything that's yours, take it back. And then we have verse 32. Jacob knew not that Rachel had stolen them. She's kept this a secret from everybody. She's apparently hidden things pretty carefully. So Jacob says, you can even kill the person who stole your gods because I didn't take them. So look, all of your families right here watching, they can watch while you go and you can look through our possessions. And if you find anything that's yours, you can take it back. So Laban's going to take him up on that offer. Then we have verses 33 to 35. Any comments before we get there? Okay, do I have a volunteer to read verses 33 to 35? I will read these verses then. And Laban went into Jacob's tent, and into Leah's tent, and into the 2 maidservants' tents, but he found them not. Then he went out of Leah's tent and entered into Rachel's tent. Now Rachel had taken the images and put them in the camel's furniture. The idea is a camel's saddle. These were bigger saddles than the ones we use now as horse saddles. That's why the Bible is using the word furniture, but it's the camel's saddle, and sat upon them. And Laban searched all the tent, but found them not. And she said to her father, let it not displease my lord that I cannot rise up before thee, for the custom of women is upon me. And he searched, but found not the images. So we see Laban's obviously going to do the search in the order of the people he thinks are most guilty. So he clearly thinks that Jacob, if there was anybody who stole them, it was Jacob. That shows, even though Jacob's reputation before Laban is spotless in how he's worked, Laban does not trust Jacob at all. So he goes and checks Jacob's possessions first, doesn't find anything. Then he's going to check the person he thinks is next most guilty. So he checks Leah's tent, doesn't find anything. And then the maidservants' tents, and then Rachel's tent last. So apparently Rachel has a very good, I'll say, way of playing innocent. Like, she's clearly guilty here, and Laban's like, oh, it must be somebody else. So he searches Rachel's stuff last. That's a total of 5 different tents, and he is searching thoroughly. So he's probably taking everything out. This is a long procession going on, and the rest of Laban's family is basically watching him go through all this, and he's not finding anything that they had stolen. So what actually has happened? Verse 34, Rachel took the images and put them in the camel's furniture and sat upon them. So either this has been planned at the start when Laban has set up camp next to them and she realizes that Laban might want to look for his images, or this was after Jacob gave Laban permission to search. While he's in some other tent, she goes into her own tent, covertly takes the idols back out, puts them in the camel's saddle, and sits on them. The one spot that she's sure then Laban can't check. And she uses the excuse of a lady's normal cycle as there's a reason why I can't get off of this camel. So Laban searches every single place he can think of and doesn't find them. Rachel's guilty, but she's able to conceal her guilt from Laban. Any questions or comments here? So, basically all of Laban's family, and Jacob's family for that matter, has been watching Laban search, a very protracted search, and he hasn't found anything that was stolen. So at this point, Jacob rebukes Laban. Do I have a volunteer to read verses 36 to 42? A volunteer to go ahead, Luke.
Jacob was wroth with the children of Israel. Jacob answered and said to Laban, what is my trespass? What is my sin that thou hast so hotly pursued me? Whereas thou hast searched all this long, what hast thou found of all my sins? Set it here before my brethren and my brethren, that they may judge against us both. This 20 years have I been with thee, and my ewes and she-goats have not cast a young, and the rams of my flock have not died. That which was torn of these I brought not unto thee. I bear them also of my hands, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. Thus I was in the day of the brought to thee, and the frost by night, and the sleep departed from my eyes. Thus I have been 40 years with my entire house, and served thee 40 years for thy 2 daughters, and 6 years for thy cattle, and thou hast changed my wages 10 times. Except the God of my father and the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac, have been with me. Surely thou hast sent me away, thou I have seen my affliction and labor in my hand, and
Very good reading, and I appreciate you reading some of the longest verses in Genesis, actually. So, Jacob was wroth, means he's very angry, because Laban's made 2 accusations that were totally false in Jacob's view, although about stealing the idols, that one was true, and one that was partially false. And now Laban has searched through everything, made a big show of it, and found nothing. And chode with Laban, the word chode means he's arguing with sharp words. When it goes from disagreement back and forth where each person is trying to say, here's why I'm right, here's what I did, to here's why you're wrong, and that's what Jacob is doing here with sharp words. What is my trespass? Which boundary did I break? What is my sin? What wrong did I do to you that thou hast so hotly pursued after me? They both know if Laban caught up in 7 days, he was going fast as he could to do that. Then he says in verse 37, whereas thou hast searched all my stuff, like I gave you permission, you searched everything. What hast thou found of all your household stuff? You searched all of mine. You didn't find anything that was yours. And then he's calling out to all the people watching, set it here to my brethren and thy brethren. They've been watching this whole thing. Like, if there was anything, you'd set it here. They'd judge between us. As it is, you didn't find anything. They're still going to judge between us. Like, it's obvious here that one person's in the right and one person's in the wrong. So Jacob's related more distantly, but he's also related to this entire city. And that's why he calls them thy brethren too. Like, they've been watching, they can judge between here. And then he's going to make the case, not only have I not done wrong for you, here's all the good I've done for you. And that starts in verse 38. These 20 years have I been with thee. So 20 years of service. Thy ewes and thy she-goats have not cast their young. Because of God's blessing, Laban's flock didn't miscarry while Jacob was watching it. And the rams of thy flock have I not eaten, saying, when I was hungry, I didn't go and decide to barbecue your sheep. So then we have verse 39. That which was torn of beasts I brought not unto thee, I bear the loss of it. So wild animals attacked and killed these sheep. I took the loss of that because I'm the one shepherding. That was my responsibility that they killed the sheep. But it's like, but I didn't just not let you know and say that, oh, one of Laban's sheep is dead again. That's no problem. He'll never find out. He said, I bore the loss of it. I made restitution. And then he said, of my hand didst thou require it, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. It's like, even if people stole sheep, you required that of me. And so apparently there are sheep thieves in that area. Verse 40, these are the conditions that Jacob worked for 20 years. Thus I was in the day the drought consumed me. We're talking about a semi-desert climate. It's hot and it's dry. And the frost by night, it's desert enough that the temperature drop between day and night is huge. So probably for about half the year, if there's any moisture in the air at all, it will frost. So my sleep departed from mine eyes, because he has to watch the flock during the night. But if you want sleep, being a shepherd is not the job to take. So we have, and Jacob's like, I put up with all of that in serving you as a shepherd. And then verse 41, thus I have been 20 years in thy house. I served thee 14 years for thy 2 daughters and 6 years for thy cattle. Both Jacob and Laban acknowledge that now Jacob has the greater part of it. And thou hast changed my wages 10 times. Both Jacob and Laban also acknowledge that to be true. Except the God of my father, the God of Abraham and the fear of Isaac, had been with me. Surely thou hadst sent me away now empty. So unless God had already worked this out, that in those 6 years I got your flock, you would have sent me away empty. I would have had nothing else. Like when I was leaving, wanting to leave 6 years before, and you bid me to stay and offer to pay me, you tried to change my wages 10 times, but God still saw that I got paid. And then he acknowledges God specifically in verse 42. God has seen mine affliction and the labor of my hands and rebuked thee yesternight. The Bible mentions this a lot of times. God sees people's affliction and he judges with it. The judging will be perfect in eternity, but even on the earth, God judges regarding affliction. And the labor of my hands, the Bible mentions very often, God doesn't forget labor that's done for him. God doesn't forget, God honors labor, God honors hard work. And so he's like, God has seen that. The affliction, both all the hardships I put up with that were natural, as well as the hardships you put upon me by changing my wages. God saw that. The labor of my hands, how hard I worked. And so he's like, and that's why God rebuked you yesternight, because God knew that you weren't right here. So God intervened. And that brings us to into verse 42. Jacob rebukes Laban, and Jacob's very angry. These are very sharp words, but everything that Jacob mentions here is true. He's not falsely accusing Laban of anything. Both of them know that everything he said here is true. Any comments or questions or things before we go on to verse 43?
It struck me just a little side, but that shows he kept a, lack of a better term, an accounting book of every one of the sheep,
Yeah.
There was something keeping track of all that very diligently. And what he's saying there, he was very righteous in all of that. And then he recognized that God had blessed, Jacob recognized God had blessed me and thus blessed you through me. And that we mentioned that before.
Yep.
The righteousness had blessed the situation overall.
So, absolutely. Our pastor made the point that they both knew that Jacob was being extremely righteous, extremely honest in all that he did. They were both keeping accounting of all of Laban's sheep. And they both knew that Jacob hadn't stolen anyone or let them get taken without telling Laban, and that Jacob would pay the restitution for that because he was a shepherd. They both knew that God had blessed Laban for Jacob's sake with his flock not miscarrying at all.
It is interesting with both those men that they had a past reputation of not being the most honest, or I don't know, not, honest may not be the right term.
Yeah.
Used a little bit of,
It's true, although Jacob's reputation of deceit would not be here. It's back with his own family. So at this point, like, they would all consider Jacob honorable and probably considered Laban shady. But with that, we go on to verse 43. And do I have a volunteer to read verses 43 to 48? Okay, go ahead, Pastor.
and Laban answered and said unto Jacob, these daughters are my daughters, and these children are my children, and these cattle are my cattle, and all that thou seest is mine. And what can I do this day unto these my daughters and unto their children which they have borne? Now therefore come thou, let us make a covenant, I and thou, and let us be for a witness between me and thee. And Jacob took a stone and set it up for a pillar. And Jacob said unto his brethren, gather stones, and they took stones and made a heap, and they did eat there upon the heap. And Laban called it,
Jegar-Shadutha is my best guess.
thank you, but Jacob called it Gilead. And Laban said, this heap is a witness between me and thee this day. Therefore was the name of it called Gilead. How far am I?
That's fine. I would get to verse 49, except for we're going to be out of time. So Laban's response is, look, everything you had came from me, but what can I do to my daughters and to the children that they gave birth to? Laban's saying, I'm going to honor you as family. Apparently, Laban's no longer angry and not thinking of doing harm to Jacob at all, because from Laban's point of view, he's accused Jacob falsely. And so we have Laban saying, okay, we're going to treat ourselves as family. Actually, we're going to make a covenant here, a peace treaty, and let's make a covenant that will be a witness between me and thee. And so they make a covenant with this heap of stones. So it's going to stand there so the rest of their family and generations to come can see this. So this is right on the top of the Mount Gilead. It will be visible from a very long spot. They make this heap of stones, and it says that they ate upon it. I'm guessing that's Jacob and Laban specifically, that they ate together in fellowship on top of this pile of stones, which would not have been comfortable, but they're doing it to show that they're both together in this covenant. So, heap of stones, they eat on it to confirm the covenant. Laban called it Jegar-Shadutha, which just means the heap of witness. And Jacob called it Gilead, which means the heap of witness in Hebrew rather than in Syriac. And Laban says that's a heap of witness between both of us. And that's why it was named Gilead, and that's why Laban called it the same thing in his own language. Any comments before we close in prayer? We'll talk about all the reasons for it and all that's included next week. What exactly is expected in this covenant, because the Bible goes through that at the end of this chapter. Okay, let's close in prayer. Dear Lord God, I thank you for today, and I pray that you would bless the rest of the day, the singing, the preaching of your word, and the fellowship together. We pray that you would be honored in everything. We pray that you would use this example of your faithfulness to Jacob, and even intervening and judging between Jacob and Laban, as a hope and a confidence that you do the same in our own lives. We thank you so much for your care for us. In Jesus' name, amen.